This is the daily business show about the business of games, entertainment, streaming, rights tech, and music. We visit here every day at noon Pacific. Today's show is fantastic. We have David Bloom back, who's a senior contributor at Forbes. He'll be our moderator. And we have Peter Levin. Peter is managing director at Griffin Gaming Partners, a really interesting new fund. And we'll be hearing more about what they're doing and what's going on in the business of games. So please make sure to introduce yourself in the chat. We've been having an amazing time in chat this week. I thought yesterday was fantastic. Also post your questions in queue. One reminder about the chat too is it's kind of funny, but the drop down is set to go just to panelists. So please change that to panelists and attendees so that everybody sees your chat comments. And then we'll have a poll go up about midway through. So without further ado, let me turn it over to David and Peter.
Hey everybody, delighted to be here with the esteemed Peter Levin of Griffin Gaming Partners. He's got a long and checkered history at the intersection of gaming and traditional entertainment. He headed interactive operations at places like Legendary and Lionsgate, and he was founder of Nerdist. So his nerd cred is wholly intact. And we're going to talk a little bit about his newest venture, which is really new. It's not even got a fund to close, so he can't tell us how big it is, but he can talk about some of what Griffin Gaming Partners is doing and a little bit about where he thinks the industry is going. Peter, welcome. So glad to be with you.
Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
So just to start, let's give people a real quick idea about what you're doing with Griffin Gaming Partners, what you guys are hoping to get into, and the directions you want to focus on in terms of investments and opportunities.
Sure. We are an investment vehicle discreetly focused on the entire gaming landscape. So that's soup to nuts, infrastructure platform, devs, pubs, studios. It's a partnership that has focused on gaming and interactive entertainment for our entire careers, 20 plus years. Myself with more of a focus as an entrepreneur, an operator, and an investor for 2 decades. My partner, Phil Sanderson, probably the most active VC from the Valley in the game space for the past 20 years. And then Nick Tuasto and Liontree, who Nick brings just an incredible background on the advisory side of architecting and helping Tencent acquire Supercell, largest transaction ever in gaming. Sold Kabam's assets to Korea-based Netmarble. And then Liontree, again, right at this intersection of media and gaming. Couldn't ask for a better partnership in this particular moment in time in particular.
Great. Just another reminder to folks, just a reminder to, if you have a question, we have a Q&A section, so you can pop that up and throw those over there so it's easier for me to keep track. I am not like those gifted Twitch commentators who can see the conversation in the chat room, zoom by at 1,000 miles an hour, and pluck out the 3 most salient features while also playing Warzone, or in my case, Destiny or whatever. But and also make sure that you're sending chat to all panelists and attendees, not just to all panelists, because it won't be nearly as fun to just talk to us. Let's start. One of the things I want to get into, you may notice my rather busy background here. It is, I think, particularly on point this week because Travis Scott, the hip-hop star, is debuting his new single, Astronomical, with a series of concert performances in Fortnite. And this is one of the assets that they released a few days ago. It's a Zoom background, which is really smart. It has Fortnite and Cactus Jack, which is Travis Scott's own record label, in the upper right-hand corner, and or left-hand if you're looking at this, and Astronomical, the name of the song that he will be debuting. And Peter, talk about this and the opportunity that this represents for music artists and others. You also, when you were at Lionsgate, did the John Wick 3 integration in Fortnite that I think was really brilliant, and lots of people have talked about it every conference I was at. So talk about these two things and this opportunity for brands and companies to connect with a gaming audience and where you see that all headed.
Sure. I mean, it's nothing short of brilliant what Travis and the folks at Epic have done yet again, tapping into this zeitgeist, this particular moment. When you think about the fact that the most attractive and the most elusive demographics in the world are now living in these games metaverses. So it's an extremely efficient and contextual way to reach that audience. And so I can tell you, when we introduced John Wick into Fortnite, that first week alone, this is prior to John Wick 3 coming out, and this was a commercial, not a promotional relationship, mind you, it was north of 400 million hours of gameplay. So if you think about raising the brand equity of John Wick going into a release weekend, you simply couldn't afford as a studio the size of Lionsgate to buy that kind of marketing, right? And so
just to clarify, so when we say 400 million hours, which is even more time than I play, much to my wife's chagrin, that 400 million hours is people playing with a John Wick themed skin or weapon or whatever asset it is, stuff to help people think about, the game. They were actually doing stuff in 400 million hours worth of gaming, right? Is that? I just want to make sure.
That's right. That's right. And it's also what they did with Marshmallow, again, kind of kicked this off. But what's so brilliant about it is they're not over the top with their marketing and messaging around these types of activations. They're very subtle. It's very nuanced. With John Wick, for example, the John Wick house and the John Wick car just appeared in the game out of nowhere. Right. And, Reddit went absolutely bananas for it. So when you think about what they're doing with Travis, you've got kids with more time than they've ever had that are living on these platforms that are going to be able to enjoy Travis Scott experiences in a variety of different time zones and geographies, as you discussed. They're buying the skin, right? They're emoting with the skin. They're emoting with their friends. There's the Zoom backdrop for the demographic that's just a step up. And it's folks like us that are taking the first 5 or 10 minutes of a webinar such as this, talking about it, right? And that's just a win on so many different indexes. Good for them. And I think the thing that Epic and what they've done with Fortnite, and they've done it so well, when you look at how they activated at E3 a couple of years ago at the zenith of Fortnite, they've kept the fun, right? They realize it's not the most complicated battle royale game mechanic out there by a lot.
Right. I mean, there's plenty that have come on that have just said, if they can do it, we can do it, and we can do it better. And others might have done it better. I mean, Apex is great for what it did. And now we've got Warzone, and I know that you may have lost a few hours of your life to Warzone. But they're still rolling, right? They still got 250 million users, right?
It's amazing. And again, I think this particular moment in time has brought back, there's a nostalgia component to it. There's also, they were the first to truly cross-platform coupled to aggressive social elements, right? And those are the things that people want more than anything in gaming these days. I want to be ambulatory with my games experience. So I want to be able to play it on my Switch. I want to be able to play it on my phone or my tablet. I want to be able to play it on my console or my PC. And I want to talk to my friends while I do it. I want to talk smack. I want to invite people in. I could tell you, as someone who's paid acute attention to the numbers of gamers globally now, the number has now exceeded 3 billion. But there are certain pockets, certain demographics that, have been kind of the holy grail. Teenage girls, for example, what Fortnite was able to do was open up the TAM for 14-year-old girls, gave them a soft landing into mid-core games because of the social component to it. There's a role for them to play within that game. And that offers opportunity for all types of publishers out there to now reach that audience who is hooked. They figured out this is an easy way into the conversation. There must be more product out there for me, and they're discovering more product.
Well, and I think that that's really crucial because, you talk about giving that whole demographic of young women a way in, right? So all of a sudden, they can take advantage of it because it has an accessible social component. To me, that was the secret weapon. It was free. So that you got rid of that barrier. It was available on every platform you could imagine you could play games on just about. So you got rid of that that barrier. And then on top of that, you could talk across platforms to everybody else. And I think, to me, that's the future of where these game things go. It can be really compelling, but there are lots of ways to skin this cat. So let's talk a little bit. You just had a really good exit with a company you were personally invested in called Hypixel. And talk about what that does and where that fits into this metaverse, these games that want to get into metaverses, that want to be accessible. Talk about what Hypixel's about.
Sure. And I had background envy, so I threw up our Santa Monica Griffin offices.
Great.
Your background is so badass. Yeah, I look very fortunate to have been a part of the Hypixel investment opportunity. Riot led the round. Some great individuals in there, Dennis Fong, Anthony Borquez. But it was very easy to see right off the bat when you met with Noxie and the team at Hypixel that these guys were doing something much different, and they had an early appreciation for the metaverse and what that could mean, leveling up with respect to the existing products in the marketplace. So, Hypixel's history of managing the largest Minecraft server, in the world gave them this incredible insight and the ability to scrape data from tens of millions of players over the years, and led them to better understand what they most appreciate about the platform, where they would like to level up and see innovation on the platform. So when you look at the Hytale trailer on YouTube, I think it's amongst, if not the most watched game trailer ever on YouTube. It's up there for Hytale. And you get through the trailer and they start to lay out for you some of the customization tools that will allow for you to create your own universe within the metaverse, right? So the holy grail is to get people on platform, be able to create discrete, customized experiences for themselves and their cohort, for their community, and still engage in the larger product. And I think that's the promise of what companies like Hypixel brought to the conversation. So, brilliantly, Riot was ahead of the curve. They saw the talent. They ended up scooping up the business, which is going to be a perfect complement to what they're already doing. With Valorant coming out later this summer, which is a step in a different direction, and this is a step in a wholly different direction. And then to be able to port these audiences, from one vehicle to the next and keep them within this common ecosystem.
Yeah, it'll be really fascinating to see how they play out. I mean, Riot spent a decade and doing very, very well with just a single game, and kept talking about, we've got other stuff coming, and now it looks like they actually have other stuff coming. So Valorant has already got a lot of buzz. But you're talking about a really interesting thing about keeping all of those titles within the same sort of universe, and that's never really been something that publishers have done. It seems to me like that's kind of a miss. There's an opportunity to have your assets be portable across those, to make the membrane permeable between the worlds. This again becomes a metaverse kind of thing and an opportunity. Let's pivot a little bit, though. I want to talk about a different kind of metaverse, or a meta sports verse. We've seen an explosion in the absence of traditional sports getting their athletes to play the video games in tournaments of their sports. And I think this week it was FIFA doing 2020, or FIFA 2020, and the FIFA soccer body, English Premier League. Some of those guys are doing the sports stuff. We've had golf with Top Golf. We've had NASCAR and short track racing with NBC Sports. The NBA, the University of Kentucky is doing some stuff with, I think, Gen G. Talk a little bit about what you think of that as an opportunity for the leagues, and what you think of that as an opportunity for for esports. Does it help esports? Does it bring that to a broader audience that has always sort of dismissed it? I mean, what's your idea of how this shakes out, and for how long will we have this around?
Yeah, I think it's something we talk about a lot, which is, part of what's happening here is so many of the places that you read about what's happening in terms of the traction of gaming, these have been very antiseptically presented facts over the last couple of years. Gaming is 3 times larger than film, and 5 times larger than TV, and larger than film and TV and publishing and music combined. that's great, but people hear that and it feels like it's down the road in the future. I think what's happened now, it's been laid bare for the global media consuming constituency. They now are holed up in their homes with their spouses or their daughters or their sons or their nieces and nephews, and they're experiencing firsthand that this demographic is either gaming or they're watching other people play games. And so as it bleeds out from there, you now have a demographic that they're starving for, to your point, golf content. So NBC Sports Network was broadcasting some of the World Golf Tour, virtual golf content. And millions of folks, I know that their numbers are up 150%, over where they were prior to COVID-19 being, thrust upon us. When you look at the virtual car racing, the Formula One races, for example, my neighbor up the street, Townsend Bell, he's a, Le Mans champion and an accomplished race car driver. He's also a broadcaster. They had to come and install a virtual rig in his home so he could get the virtual experience.
I just want to know, Peter, when he drives down the street, does he speed? Like, does he just...
Our kids played baseball together, and following him home, following him to a restaurant after a baseball tournament to go order a beer, is not fun. Not fun at all. But horse racing, for example, right? The UK threw that horse race a couple weeks ago. 4.3 million people tuned into it.
Right.
So I think to your point and your query, it is so not niche, right? I think esports, competitive gaming got painted as this niche thing. It's not niche when the numbers for the past several years have been larger than the NBA Finals. The League of Legends Championship, one match than the finals combined, the viewership.
Right.
But I think in terms of the public's orientation towards it now, they're just looking at it through a much, much different lens because, like I said, it's been laid bare in their home environments.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many conversations I had trying to explain to people what esports was, people who were sports fans, and they go, so wait a minute, so people sit there and watch people play games? It's like, yeah, it's sort of like people sitting there and watching somebody play a game of football on TV. It's almost, in fact, exactly the same. And they go, and they didn't quite get it. And I think now they got a chance to get it a little bit. This, like a lot of things, is going to be an accelerant, I think, for trends that have been slowly unfolding and unpacking in many, many areas of our lives, this whole pandemic thing.
I want to add one thing, because I think one of the primary drivers, and it's the often not talked about part of sport that is the economic driver, which is betting and gambling.
Right. I wanted to get into that. So yeah, please. The gambling, that horse race had to have gambling out the wazoo, right? 4.3 million people, they're all betting. Absolutely, right?
And there's going to be so much of that in so many permutations around competitive gaming. And the difference being the inventory is infinite. So it will end up being the largest category, in online and virtual gambling and betting. And so whether that's, in virtual currency or real currency, inevitably in the long term, it's going to win. And that's, that you get a beer and any executive at the NFL, they're going to tell you, it's fantasy football and betting that, keeps the lights on. And that's going to be pervasive, again, in so many permutations within competitive gaming.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point about a wide open inventory, because, the NFL to some extent benefits because there's only, it'll be 17 games this year plus the playoffs, assuming we have a season, which is increasingly looking like a bit of a stretch. So at this point, the gambling can be a way to make money, but when do you anticipate that esports will be able to reclaim some other parts of its revenue streams, of live events that actually have attendees and some of the merchandise that I'm sure is taking a hit? What's your sense as a money guy looking at this stuff? What's your sense of when they can reclaim those corners, or are we ever going back?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak as much to traditional sport, although
esports in particular.
Yeah, I'll get to that, because there's so many folks from traditional sport that have invested in esports, which is where I'm going. I want to come back to that in a second. But I think relative to competitive gaming, it's so early. I mean, I liken it to, it's the second pitch of the first inning of a 9-inning game, right? In particular in North America. It's not like it is in Korea and parts of China, down in Brazil. And so I think there was a shiny toy, in the esports world last year and the year before, kind of like what VR was in the 2 to 3 years before that, which was,
Right.
the shiny toy. A lot of tourist capital, was
Right.
attracted to both VR and into competitive gaming because they felt like I'm reading about it everywhere. My kid's watching it constantly. This is a thing I need to be in. So let's find a way in. And I think the longer term, more strategic thinking around it. For example, in Immortals, where I have the honor of serving as chairman, one of our major shareholders is AEG, one of the largest events companies, if not the largest events company in the world.
Right. They run Staples Center. They own the LA Kings hockey team. I think they own a tiny piece of the Lakers also as part of
the
that.
Galaxy and venues all over the world and teams all over the world. But
Right.
they came in and said, look, it took us 20 plus years to make Major League Soccer make sense. And now these franchises are selling for north of $500 million. And they're profitable and they're viable and the ownership quality is on par with the best leagues in the world. It's going to take a long time for these esports franchises and platforms to make sense. And so I don't think, in particular, like for our fund, for example, we would not be looking at investing in a franchise per se. Some of the platform and infrastructure plays, absolutely, and we already have. That's not to say we don't believe in franchises. We very much do. It's just a different timeline.
It's a different window. I mean, you've got your fund has to disperse and return funds within a certain number of years, right? Isn't that? I mean, I don't keep track of the SEC as closely, perhaps as I should, but they have to. You have to bring the money in, invest a certain amount every year, and then also return funds at some point. Correct?
It's correct. But even beyond the SEC regulations or the mandate or the remit, of the fund, just practically speaking, we just don't see the timelines lining up. They don't map onto each other well relative to what we have established as our goals and ambitions for our own vehicle. That's not to say other vehicles don't have a different remit. Just for ourselves, it's outside of our parameters. Plus, we have LPs that are owners in multiple teams, so there's conflicts of interest, which made it even easier for us not to pursue it. Long-winded way of saying, though, looking through the lens of the traditional tropes of traditional sport can be dangerous. And so I think one of the things that competitive gaming has the advantage of is it's a native mobile product, right? So much of what happened in the early days of competitive gaming already happened online. And so them gravitating back towards an online competitive environment, A, it's doable technologically. B, you're dealing with a cohort, again, that's native digital. They're very comfortable watching, consuming this content on these platforms.
Right. This is where they live. So it's like, oh, don't throw me in the briar patch, right?
Right. And also, if you look at Twitch, it's got better CPMs than premium cable. So, marketers are very comfortable living there and breathing there as well. So it already has kind of this insulated ecosystem. In terms of merchandise, you can buy whatever you want online, whether it's the virtual skins. Again, as someone who plays Call of Duty Warzone every single night with my team, we got our 6W last night.
Woohoo! Woo!
Yeah.
This is the deal. That's a big deal. I love that you're doing team building because we were chatting earlier today, and I was mentioning that you do team building with your guys in esports, and it makes a lot of sense because there's a thing to do together that does require teamwork. There's a opportunity to talk about it as you're doing it, not just about the game, but other stuff. But you build a relationship in a different way. And it felt a little bit like what I was hearing from folks at The Void, the location-based entertainment company that's got an outlet here in Santa Monica where I'm based. They said they have tech companies come in and do their adventures and stuff. So like it's so much better than walking across hot coals as far as I'm concerned. But this is like the new thing, right? You're going to be the future of not just entertainment, but the future of organizational design, it seems like.
Well, it's certainly been for so many folks in a very stressful moment in time. It's a way to recapture those lost casual social moments that you had during your day, whether it's walking into someone's office, stopping by, in the kitchen, In our case, playing Big Buck Hunter or Golden Tee or Terminator. So to be able to, at the end of the day, because it's difficult to do that on a Zoom call, everyone's kind of playing their role, relative to your enterprise.
Right.
But at the end of the day, look, I can tell you of my Griffin team, I am by far the worst. So I know the role I have to play. So all of a sudden we're juxtaposed, right? I'm the guy, if there's an extra gas mask, I make sure that James or Anthony gets it because they're going to be more valuable in the final zone than I'm going to be. Right. And so I'll jump in front of a bullet, in order for us to get the win, because I'll take equal credit for it. I was there, but, I'm being dragged along. And so the dynamic of kind of the managing director, senior partner, all of a sudden that gets juxtaposed, and that's really healthy as well.
That's interesting to think about, right? It's sometimes difficult for the alpha guy to figure out he's not the alpha in this one, and to think about the different role. But that's really, it changes a lot of dynamics, and you can talk about a lot of stuff as you're going in a very different way. You're right. I mean, it becomes a backdrop for a whole different sort of interaction. Let's talk about the Immortals a little bit more, because first of all, you do have AEG and some other big names involved as investors. I think the esports teams are doing really fascinating stuff. FaZe Clan just put out, speaking of crossovers, just put out jerseys yesterday with the NFL, tied to the NFL, and the first drop that league, I think, has been involved in. We certainly have seen lots of interesting stuff from a lot of other teams, and Immortals is a big old team. They've got, talk a little bit about what you're hoping to do with Immortals, where they're playing now, and where they're going.
Sure. I really got to get you an Immortals jersey, because I know you got a Liquid jersey, and I know you got a FaZe jersey. And
got a couple FaZe jerseys. I'm racking these things up, man. I got a 100 Thieves jersey, man. I'm rolling.
I'm a huge fan of all of those guys, and it's definitely a rising tide moment. There's a few of our franchises, the ones that you ticked off, and I think Immortals is fortunate to be amongst them, that operates in the LA tier, and consider ourselves much more than a franchise, but a platform, right? So we went out and bought Gamers Club down in Brazil, which is the largest matchmaking platform down in that market. We have certain announcements coming out relative to positions that we've taken and acquired in different businesses relative to the core business of Immortals, extending our brand. Key to that is the major shareholder base that we've got. So we've got AEG, we've got Mike and Gregory Milken. Mike Milken is like Dr. Manhattan-sized brain compared to the rest of us, humanity. Meg Whitman is a major shareholder. Steve Kaplan, co-founder of Oaktree, is a major shareholder, also owns DC United, and Meg owns the Cincinnati Major League Soccer franchise, I would add. So we definitely have the resources to play a very long game. And I think that was always our goal. Somebody said to me, it's actually a former executive at an MCN, who's like, these esports franchises feel like, the MCNs of today. And again, never, as a guy who ran Nerdist, I never believed in the MCN model, could never pencil out those numbers.
Right. It was hard to make because they didn't own anything, right? They were just a go-between.
It was like a failed arbitrage model.
Right. It's like crazy. It's like they went, and we should look back with fondness for that moment of irrational exuberance. But this is different, though, because you're creating content, you're creating merchandise, you're creating business models that make sense. At least they generate some funds and some relationships that the organization owns.
That's right.
Not just
competition is tribal, right? If you're going to put a backdrop on your Zoom or a jersey in your home or your office, you care. So does that have to be city-based? Not always. But is it fun when it is sometimes? Absolutely. Right? Would it be great to have, I've been fortunate to co-teach a class at USC in competitive gaming, and I've got a split home between UCLA and USC. Would it be great if UCLA and USC became, the world-renowned competitive, university versus university competitive gaming platform? Hell yes. Like, how great would that be?
It's good enough in football. I mean, even though the teams have been down lately. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm just surprised that it's the Annenberg School. I used to teach over at the film school, and I was an administrator over at the business school. I'm just surprised it's the communications school, where I have a lot of friends, doing esports, because it's like, why there? Why is it there?
But, you know, I would say, because I've been talking to Danny and the guys over there, and Jim. What I don't want to go on a praise rant on USC, but what they have done for gaming, I mean, clearly they're
Right.
the leader globally in terms of setting up a school for gaming that has produced some incredible talent, including Brandon and Mark, founded Riot, but I honestly think it's now bleeding into these other schools because there's almost nowhere else to go with it.
Right. That's true. And their program was already cross-platform anyway. You had the art school and the engineering school and the business school, and all these guys kind of had some piece of it in one way or another already, right? So I guess
they've definitely established the roadmap and the template for, I think, both domestic and global universities to replicate. And we've had a bunch of conversations around that, but I think that type of innovation, what they're doing there, hopefully gets picked up at more and more universities, because that's going to do nothing but create, more innovation, more opportunities, quite frankly, for a vehicle like mine to invest in, because it's going to get more talent interested in it. They're going to be more attracted to this market, so we'll be proximate to them.
Great. Now, while we're at it, it's about 12:31, so we've got a few minutes left here. Let's put up, if we could, Laura, the poll questions for the day. Some of these are inspired by our conversation. So please take a minute to check these things off, and we'll talk a little bit more about them when we're done. In the meantime, we've got a few questions from the audience that we haven't gotten into yet, and we'll talk about those. So the poll should be up in front of you guys. Pop off your answers, and let's get those numbers rolling so we can do our version of Family Feud. But
I didn't get to vote. It said we're not allowed to vote.
No, because you have already expressed your opinions and are shaping the outcome of the poll with your persuasive view of the universe. So it's like it would be sort of stacking the deck. Then
I play a lot of Animal Crossing too, for the record.
For the record. And by the way, to my mind, that's probably the game and the company that's won. This is a weird thing to say. Won the pandemic, right? I mean, it's gotten as big. It's gotten as big out there in the zeitgeist as anything. The Travis Scott thing's gonna be huge, but I mean.
Okay, so they sold 1.88 million physical copies of the game in the opening 3 days. More than 392,000 consoles were sold in Japan during the launch week, and they just put an additional 22 million into production. Look, Miyamoto, to me, I mean, I've sent you that photo. Like,
yeah,
he's the golden god. He's the Walt Disney of gaming. So if anyone's going to win, quote unquote, it should be them.
Well, yeah, I mean, because they've got something that's not, as you call it, the mid-core. They can claim the mid-core, though nobody's going to confuse Animal Crossing with the mid-core or hardcore game space. It is as sweet as can be. The new version, I remember when the original came out, and my kids at that point were probably 12 and 13 or 10 and 11, something like that. And, wedging them off that long enough to take them back to their mothers was a bit of a challenge. So, the DNA's there. You've got some nostalgia gaming in this crisis time for this new version. I mean, it just happened to come out when it came out, but I mean, it was perfect for folks who wanted to use gaming as something better than just watching Friends again, which apparently is going to be available in about a month from today on HBO Max, again, for you to binge if you still need to find out what those crazy kids in New York are doing.
My only note on Animal Crossing would be, you got to get through that first 4 or 5 days because it's a grind. But then it opens up. Like, they definitely test you. They want to make sure that you're all in.
Are you serious? Do you really love us?
Oh,
yes.
The first 4 or 5 days are an absolute grind.
Well, there's a lot of games like that, and I say that as a Destiny player myself. So,
yeah, I know.
Mark Patterson, who is in the game space, asks, with mobile gaming also gaining momentum and increasing the number of devices supporting esports, should advertisers approach really the multitude of platforms out there? And of course, mobile is where half the revenues of this $140 billion industry are. He's asking which KPIs are of value also. So any thoughts on where advertisers should put their money? They're not going to be able to put them in some places. Those games aren't set up for it. But where should they be putting their money in the game space?
Well, first of all, mobile is a fantastic environment within which to reach women, right? So when you look at 10 years ago when the games business was 90% male, 10% female, and now it's 55-45-ish, there's still a delta there to play with, and there's still an opportunity to reach, again, that incredibly powerful demographic who spends a tremendous amount of time and more money than males do on mobile. So if you're a marketer and you're trying to reach that audience, you need to figure that out. I think around competitive gaming, if you're a brand or a marketer, you'd be absolutely out of your mind to touch anything on linear TV, these days, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, what's left of it? I mean, it's going to be pretty battered, I think, by the time we get done with all this. But you're right.
So I think finding ways to work with, the more viable platforms, the opportunities there to contextually bake your brand in, not just look like you're buying eyeballs, but find a way to communicate, with that audience is. And brands like Red Bull and Coca-Cola and P&G have been doing a good job. Unilever kind of spending the cycles trying to figure that out much more aggressively than they migrated from linear platforms to digital online. I think they learned their lesson that they're doing this much quicker. And I definitely think this has truncated that window just because every day they're waking up and reading about these numbers. You can't argue with this data.
No.
This is such a data-driven industry. The KPIs are just right there in front of you. The high-capacity networks are being stressed anywhere from 45 to 75% more than they ever have before because of gaming. Steam week after week is breaking, its titles, its records. Discord, is being stressed more than it ever has before. These are statistics, and if you even look at the market, the way the public markets are treating, some of these stocks, Activision, EA, and Take-Two relative to a lot of other folks out there, people are understanding what's happening.
Yeah. Angie Dalton from Signum Growth Capital says, hi, Peter.
Hi, Angie.
She says, you were dead right on VR when it hit the scene. You were talking about some of that tourism capital coming in and learning the hard way that the market wasn't quite ready for broad growth, though lots of possibilities. I think it's matured substantially in the last 3 years. But now, she points out, I think this is dead on too, we have Alex or Half-Life Alex, which is just a killer game by all accounts. And we have things like the Oculus Quest, which thankfully is both less expensive and isn't making people sick routinely. I think that's not just the equipment, it's also the way you produce the software on it. But do you think we've turned the corner in VR? Do you see any opportunities here? Or are you still in wait and see mode?
Yeah, I took a lot of grief. I got to tell you, I was probably the only guy who ran an interactive business at a studio who didn't invest in a VR production company, and got a lot of grief. I know my partner Phil, who would do panels, would take a lot of flack too, because he also agreed with me. It was lacking two things that are so fundamental to gaming, right? Which is social and repeatability. So there was a novelty to it. It was great to play once, but it was never like, oh, I got to get back to the mall and go do that again. To your point earlier about it being a great opportunity to have a, team building moment with your team, that's fine because you do that maybe twice a year, right? But it lacked the repeatability and the social. Do I think we're probably not there yet on it? Alex, was an incredible leap forward. When you look at, who's behind that title and you look at Valve and you look at Steam, they're just incredible innovators, and they were really early on trying to figure this out. Even the early Dota 2 demos that they did was still probably the most beautiful thing I saw early on in VR. And they was very contemplative about maximizing the technology for what it was, but not making it so over the top that you got nauseous or, felt uncomfortable within the rig. Still think it's a ways off. It's not the test I always gave when folks would ask me about it, in particular at a lunch or a dinner, I'd say, I'll tell you what, if in this restaurant, if there's a single human being who owns a VR rig that doesn't work for a VR company, I'll pick up the check for the entire restaurant. If not, you pick up the check for the entire restaurant. Are you willing to take that bet? And they would never say yes. And I'd say, okay, well then we're done talking about this, right? Because if it's not having that, whereas every single person in that restaurant had some kind of a game, something on their phone.
Right. Absolutely. Oh yeah. Even if it's just Sudoku or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Words with friends, chess
Words with friends. Yeah.
Candy Crush, Lily's Garden, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's true. Another question, this guy, some guy I've never heard of named Ned Sherman asks, what do you think about networks like Venn, V-E-N-N? I've never heard of Venn. I guess I have heard of Ned, but Venn is a new thing. It's like Ned is talking about one of his clients, I think. But what do you think about these guys?
He just likes monosyllabic names.
Yeah, well, David Bloom does too, so.
Oh, you got David Bloom,
Believe me, I hold on to that second syllable very tightly, so no Daves here.
We want as many Venns in this world to prevail as possible because it means more opportunities, more platforms, more environments for more games content, right? So if you're trying to level up, what is currently being offered out there, and you're aspiring to kind of learn from things that have been done well in the past and probably things that have been done less than great, theirs is a completely different orientation towards, creating one-stop shopping for, gaming and competitive gaming content. It's a rock star team. So we're rooting for them. Again, for us, the more people ask it all the time, like, what do you think about, what Caffeine is trying to do? We would love for there to be more competition for Twitch and for YouTube. We want Mixer to prevail. We want Facebook to prevail. We want Snap to prevail. We want Caffeine to prevail. All that means is there's more outlets. Back in the day, if you talk to folks, in the television or cable industry, it was, the more buyers who enter the fray, the better it is for market tension. Then all of a sudden you had streamers, right? So,
didn't want them entering because that was going to mess everything up. But yeah, that's interesting. Do we have there's still a couple of minutes to vote on the poll. I hope folks do so. Some of this is designed to get some of your all's thoughts about some of the things we've been talking about today, like Warzone versus Animal Crossing versus Roblox or others. And when we think things are going to be back to, I don't want to call it normal, whatever the new normal is going to be, but back to a baseline of life. And what that means for esports and beyond. So please take a minute and respond. Kara Scharf asks what you think, is there a future for non-competitive games? And I don't know if it is actually right to call it a game if it's not competitive. I mean, it's an experience, it's a sharing thing, it's a whole bunch of stuff. Is that like, games are the things you keep score on? Isn't that a good basic definition of a game? Throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think you could gamify, edutainment, right? I mean, I think one of the things that we're seeing, kind of the four sectors, that have absolutely exploded during this pandemic. You've obviously got streamers, you've got online education, gaming, and then there's adult entertainment, which isn't investable in from our orientation. But I think in online education, you're going to see a tremendous amount of innovation now. Like, oh, wow. Okay, this actually worked. People ironed out a lot of kinks in what the product offering. My son's next door. He goes 8 to 3 p.m. He's on Zoom taking classes. That inevitably will end up being a much more dynamic effort. So will there be gamification of some of that? Sure. Edutainment over the years, there's been pockets of success. I think Disney had a nice business for a while, licensing that business out. So I do think some of what has happened in the world will lead to other verticals in gaming and gamification, in particular as you see some of the streamers sticking their toe into the water too. Netflix has some interactive programming up there now. If people are paying a $20 or $30 monthly fee, they would A, like kids content, B, if on top of that you can provide them with some games content, all the better. And they're not subject to all that COPPA compliance, or at least the same degree of COPPA compliance, that you would be traditionally through a traditional broadcaster. So
it's less marketing driven, so you're a little protected. Is that the basic thing?
Correct.
Okay.
It's not ad driven.
Let's see what we got here. Oh, Phil Lelyveld, one of your USC semi-colleagues. He's over at the film school in the Entertainment Technology Center. Phil lobs in a question saying, how soon after social distancing do you see biathlete sports launch? People that play the same sport in the real and virtual worlds. I mean, I think that's almost like the guy who can play offense and defense for the USC Trojans. There's not very many of them. So what's your thought?
Yeah, I think that, that would be amazing. If first of all, it'd be a great narrative. I think, again, you're going to see like the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, right? Where you get Bill Murray up there, right? And you get Michael Jordan up there, amongst some of the best golfers in the world. I think Fortnite's already established that bar where,
Right.
at their world championships, they had the best streamers and gamers in the world playing with rappers and basketball
NBA
players.
stars and all those guys. Yeah. I
Right.
mean, like actually you think about it, like the Pro-Am over at Pebble Beach would have not just Bill Murray, but it would have people like Charles Barkley, noted for his horrendous golf swing, but Charles Barkley, who's, a Hall of Fame NBA player playing golf. And now we're going to have Steph Curry, who's going to be in the Hall of Fame. And apparently wants to get his PGA card. How many of those guys are going to be able to play video games too? That's going to be really entertaining to watch. So,
But I think, it's something we've always known. These teams take their consoles with them on the road.
Right.
The cultures are very enmeshed. They're enamored with one. It's, again, like the adage used to be, every actor wants to be an athlete and every athlete wants to be an actor, and every singer wants to be an actor, and every, actor wants to be a singer. And so
right.
gaming has now reached that level, in particular what, Drake was able to do with Fortnite. So I think there's a lot of fun to be had there, whether or not someone actually crosses over as, I'm the premier draft pick, wide receiver for the Trojans. I also happen to be, top 10 in the world at Madden football.
Juju Smith-Schuster, fantastic receiver, played for the Trojans, plays for Pittsburgh Steelers now, and he's a serious gamer. I mean, I think he's one of the best ones on his team by all accounts, and he's a big personality who's broken through and selling merchandise and all that. So people like that, I think, are going to be really interesting to watch, who are going to be, maybe they're not going to be at the level of the Team Liquids in terms of their ability, but they can be competitive. They can be in the game, and in a 100 versus one, really almost anybody has sort of a shot, so to speak.
Yeah, they're bringing audience to the conversation, right? They have an inherent, network that they're bringing in.
You look at guys like Lil Yachty and Offset, who are doing things with FaZe and some of these other guys. They're in the music space and they play games and et cetera, et cetera. It's really, I think, a fascinating smear here of subcultures going on.
And I think music, more than anything, you're going to continue to see more and more innovation there, where you're going to see talent want to be within these gaming environments and have even a more interactive relationship. So it's not just a passive one-way communication. Right. So you're starting to see some really interesting innovation there. That's an area that we're spending a lot of time looking at. And then again, I think baking some of these personalities, as you're referencing, into these gaming experiences, at these competitions, whether they're virtual competitions or hopefully in the not too distant future in person.
Yeah. Real quickly, Laura, can we put up the poll results? So we got a couple minutes left here. So we'll zip through these. The games you're playing most or hearing the most about during this shelter-at-home period: Animal Crossing by a nose over Warzone, Call of Duty Warzone. It's about a quarter each, but slightly bigger part of the quarter for Animal Crossing. Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, and others. Another one. There's certainly plenty out there that are beyond. How long do you think it will be before esports teams will be able to hold live tournaments with fans actually present? First half of next year, which is probably, to my mind, pretty close to it. 43% are putting their money there. Another 13%, about 1 in 7 of you, actually 1 in 8 of you, think it's not going to be till the second half of 2021. And a couple thought never. It'll never be the way it previously was. As you say, though, Peter, if anybody's set up to survive in that setting, it's definitely going to be the esports guys, because they start from that space and walk back to live events, really. Sports leagues such as the NBA, FIFA, and others are holding esports tournaments Is this the kind of tournament likely to continue? Yes, it'll be another way to connect to fans and promote the sport. 42% think that's the thing. It's going to be happening. And another 40% think, it'll work for some. It's not going to make so much sense for the golfers, maybe. So we'll see how that plays out, literally. And what upcoming platform are you most interested in buying / using? The PS5 from Sony is the winner with 45%. This is interesting to me that, Xbox really whiffed on the launch of the last generation of platforms and fought back to some, making some strides with the Xbox One. But I don't think they're really getting a lot of heat. I mean, the PlayStation 5 is continuing to get a lot of conversation. So is, to some extent, people wanting to keep using their PC with a new graphics card. Any thoughts about the PlayStation 5? I mean, the console wars in this generation. I mean, we're talking about we're not going to need consoles anymore. Any thoughts about any of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think Microsoft has been the quiet killer in their game strategy, and they don't get enough credit for it. So leveraging that Azure backbone, them ramping up for cloud gaming. They've got, the xCloud is going to be an absolute beast. They've got a decade of a head start with that Azure backbone that they're able to tap into. They've been quietly buying up studios for the last 2 years, and great studios, left of center, edgy content. So I think they may not win this next round of the console war. I think PlayStation has been brilliant and by the way, you talk about, dramatic pivot, because 2 consoles ago, they were lagging. And it was incredibly difficult to socialize or to find people on their platform to communicate with, to transact. And they've come such a long way, PlayStation. So I give them credit. But in terms of where we're going to be seeing around that corner, I actually think Microsoft doesn't get enough credit for what they've done over the last 18 to 24 months. And to their credit, they've been somewhat quiet about it. As Google's kind of laid down Stadia, right, and Apple threw their hat into the ring with Arcade. I think it's really, Microsoft with, again, that Azure backbone and xCloud and Amazon with their resources. There's like 8 to 10 new actors that have entered the theater in the game space.
Right. It's going to be
fantastic for everything we're talking about. For a vehicle like ours, it couldn't be better, right? Because the investment over the next decade in the form of market growth versus ROI is going to be significant.
All right, that's a really great place, I think, for us to wrap this up. I'm David Bloom. You can reach me on LinkedIn at David L. Bloom and on Twitter at David Bloom. Peter, where can you be found? And then we'll go to Ned to send us on our way. Peter, where can they find you? Unfortunately, right now, just because we haven't had our final close, I'm going to keep it a little low pro. So I want to thank you all for your time and great session, David. Appreciate it. Ned, thank you as always.
Peter, great to have you on. David, really engaging conversation today. Thanks, guys. Let me just queue up tomorrow's segment. Tomorrow is Thursday. Thursdays, we do the Rights Tech Roundtable with Paul Sweeting. The topic tomorrow is going to be the current climate for investing in M&A in music rights. A really interesting topic. We have some fantastic guests on, so stay safe, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.